Welcome to the Gray Podcast, Between the Black and White, a bi-weekly podcast about current events through the lens of a white therapist, a black objectivist, and a white analyst. I'm Vanessa.
I'm Clifford.
And I'm John.
And this is episode 2, addressing the issues facing the world as of the date of this recording in July of 2020. Today's episode, we're talking about policing in America, the intersection of policing and mental health, and some other topics hitting the news as we speak. And we're also beginning our top 5 series on this episode, so you guys will get a chance to get to know us a little bit more as we go. So hello, gentlemen. It's good to be talking to you again.
Good to be back.
Yeah. What's been going on? Anything new crossing your minds lately?
I've been lamenting my failed musical aspirations.
That's a pretty common thing to be lamenting throughout a...
Yeah, it's one of my bigger regrets in life. Like, over the past, I don't know, it's probably been 10 years. Like, I bought 2 guitars, and I practiced for a grand total of an hour, cumulatively.
So a half an hour on each, about.
About that, yeah.
They're not getting a lot of mileage.
Nah, one's just sitting in a shed. It hasn't been touched in probably 4 years.
Is it at least on display or somewhere that like makes you look cool? Like, yeah, I play guitar sometimes.
No. The other one's long gone. Yeah. It's...
What kind of music were you hoping to play with it?
Well,
I feel like you're a folksy, bluesy type of guy.
I love folk music and I love the blues. I also am a child of the like early 2010s Philly punk scene, so a lot of that as well.
Who's a part of that? I don't know what that is. Any names we would know?
Probably not.
Okay.
The Menzingers are probably the biggest name out of that bunch.
Yeah, I have no idea. As soon as you said 2010s, I thought, nope. And then you said Philly, and I was like, definitely not. And then you're like, punk. And I was like, what's happening in Philly these days?
Philly had the punk scene in like 2011 to like 2015, give or take. It's died off a little bit, or at least I've stopped going as much because I've gotten older. But yeah, through college, like that was my thing.
What major punk rock artists were out during that time that we would know, hopefully?
Against Me?
Okay, I've heard
They're a fascinating band, actually. They're a fascinating band. They're really cool. I don't know, like the Gaslight Anthem.
Oh, I've heard of them too.
They're less punk and more like Americana-y. I don't know.
Anybody who's been on any of the Tony Hawk pro skateboarding games. That's like the only way I would know them, probably.
Probably not.
Okay.
It's bands like, Cayetana and Chumped, Jeff Rosenstock. That's who I came of age with, I guess.
I sincerely hope somebody is listening to this like, yeah, like totally like, yes, I love these people. I got posters on my walls and just totally feeling...
My sister will listen to this and be very, very appreciative that I brought it up.
That's awesome.
Like, fuck the top 5 list. What John was talking about in the beginning. This is what I want to hear for.
Yeah. John, what's your top 5 Philly punk bands of the early 2010s?
Very specific.
Yes.
Very specific. What about you, Cliff? Do you have any instruments hiding somewhere in your life?
I do. I have a harmonica that I purchased around 2015, maybe. There's this anime that I love, Cowboy Bebop, and there's just one song that I can't remember the name of, but it just inspired me. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna learn to play the blues. I'm sad all the time. I can sing sad songs. I can write sad songs. I just need a harmonica to play in between while I do the work.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever left the house, and I think I'm too embarrassed to try to play it out in public. And like, to me, it's loud and annoying, and it attracts attention. I don't feel like I don't feel free enough to learn how to play on my own. So it's been here. It's been every state and city I've moved to. It's been here with me. It's currently here in my closet, stuck in between two sweaters.
So you definitely won't play it in public, but it sounds like you're still uncomfortable even just playing it when you're alone.
Yeah, because it's loud, I guess. I don't know. I have this mindset of like disturbing neighbors. I don't want to be. I never want to be that person. I always try to be mindful, which also is kind of limiting at times.
Yeah.
Then maybe I'll pick it up when I'm like 50 and I'm old and don't care anymore. Then
Right.
it'll be okay.
You're like in the get off my lawn stage of your life, and the harmonica actually supports that because the kids are like, I don't want to go over to the house. There's a horrible sound coming from it.
That's the harmonica guy. Yeah, I want to be the harmonica guy on the block.
To support that, one of the best modern blues artists is a guy named T. Model Ford. He got his first. He has like the best blues musician backstory ever. He was in prison and on a chain gang for murdering a guy. And when he got out, his fifth wife divorced him and left him with a guitar. He was like 60 at the time, and he learned like to play by himself and just put out the most incredible Delta blues, like this side of the 1940s. Amazing. T. Model Ford, listen to him. He's fantastic.
Interesting.
Old age can bring inspiration. I'm here for it.
Exactly.
I'm here for it.
Exactly.
He opens a lot of his songs with can't read, can't write, never went to school a day in my life. Again, he is the like epoch of blues. It's incredible.
Nice. We've got to have just a whole episode of John talking about music.
Is he on Spotify?
Yeah.
He is on Spotify.
I've only got
Vanessa?
I've got a trombone in my mother's basement, which has been there since I was in the 4th grade, which is when I started playing the trombone. And I did not want to play the trombone. I really wanted to play the saxophone, but my 4th grade band teacher held up my arm and he said, "You've got long arms. I need you on trombone." And I was like, no, like it was the biggest devastation of my life. So I played it for a couple years and then stuffed it away in the basement. And, it's just taking up real estate and not doing anything else. So
it's just how adults kill dreams and aspirations, right? They don't give us what we want. They give us what they think is best for us.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, I kind of see through this, but I'm in the 4th grade and I don't know how to argue with an adult. So
Right.
I guess I just got to take this one.
I guess I'm on the trombone, right?
Yeah, there we go. That's the next 7 years of my life.
Wow.
Yeah. So I haven't bought any guitars, although I've wanted to, but I've feared that I will get them and then not do anything with them. So I haven't quite made that investment yet. But I'm kind of inspired by this conversation. I might go do it.
Right. You're the most skilled out of the three of us. So, me and John will start practicing and we can do a little band, trombone, harmonica, and guitar, and we'll make it work somehow.
Oh, that would be super fun and weird. I don't know what sounds we would make, but it would be interesting.
The world's first ska blues fusion band. Great.
Yeah. We can make a podcast out of it, right? we can perform live.
Perfect.
We can retire from podcasting and do music. That'll be the main focus moving forward. That's the goal of the podcast. Us becoming musicians and retiring from doing podcasts.
I love it. You heard it here first. Our first album's coming out soon. Well, there is, of course, a lot of wild stuff going on in the news, which is really what we're here to talk about. And I know, I'm noticing that even for myself, these episodes are hard to prepare for because the news changes so drastically from like hour to hour, day to day these days. But one thing that has been remaining pretty consistent, at least in terms of larger conversations, is just about policing in America. And what does defunding the police look like? What would it look like if those funds are distributed to other community resources? And if there was a whole new model of law enforcement thought up and implemented. And so I had been thinking a little bit as somebody who is a therapist, and I've worked in a lot of mental health settings prior to what I'm doing now, which is in private practice, which is sort of like a luxurious manifestation of being a therapist. But up until this point, I've done a lot of social work. I've done a lot of work in residential treatment facilities. And this whole conversation's really made me reflect on the experiences and the training that I've had around de-escalating crisis situations with people who are potentially violent, and what I know, what I've seen work, what I've done myself, and what I think it sort of takes to de-escalate somebody who's in those situations. So I've been thinking about that. And I know, John, you have some thoughts on policing and some examples that we can get into about what different iterations of policing will look like. But I just wanted to start us off by talking about just some of my experience with de-escalating, which I find to be an art, and it's a very subtle art. That I think you have to be really willing to go at the pace of the other person. You still want to be containing, but you don't want to be forceful, and you don't want to speed anybody up if they're needing to go slower or if they already are kind of sped up, which a lot of people who are in crisis situations are experiencing. And I absolutely recognize too that like the crisis situations that I've had to de-escalate were inside of treatment contexts. So it wasn't like a random person on the street where it felt maybe a little chaotic, although it still feels chaotic when you've got somebody who's in a mental health crisis. And so I want to be clear, because I'm mindful of this as I'm talking about this, that as I discuss my experiences of de-escalating folks in crisis, it has been in the context of treatment facilities or mental health clinics and not on the street where things can maybe feel a little bit more chaotic and hard to contain. So I understand that it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I also think that there are some de-escalation tactics that are severely lacking from what we see in law enforcement in general, what I've certainly witnessed from individual instances with law enforcement. And so I have seen with some interactions that I've had with cops that they really tend to want to do things at their own pace, which is maybe an occupational hazard. Maybe that's just part of the stress of being a cop and feeling like you have to use your authority and you have to use your ability to be forceful and have the last say to kind of get control over a situation. But that really is not usually an effective approach to take when you're trying to de-escalate somebody. I mean, I've even seen this where there was a woman, a Black woman, I don't know what that's worth in this conversation, but she was having a seizure and she was on the floor. We were on the train in LA and I got down on the floor with her and somebody else got down on the floor with her. And then when we got to the next stop, we let an LAPD officer who was on the platform, we let him know that this woman was having a seizure and that she was going to need medical assistance. And she had basically just come to. She had just kind of regained consciousness. And he started yelling at her, like, let's go, let's get off the train. And I was like, yo, she just had a seizure. Like, why are you yelling at her like as though she's done something wrong, right? You need to calm down for a second and try to meet her where she is because she's in crisis and she is mentally, physically, and emotionally not where you need her to be right now. So that was really upsetting to me. And I had to intervene because it felt abusive the way that he was talking to her. And I think that whether somebody is having a physical crisis or a mental health crisis, de-escalating really means meeting the person where they are and trying to understand what it is that they need, what they need, what they're not able to express. And recognize that you might be meeting somebody else in a different reality than the one that you're existing in. And this, of course, would especially be true for somebody who is experiencing psychosis or is under substance use or is even having a traumatic reaction, like a re-traumatization or a trigger that's going to make them maybe act erratically or in a way that's confusing to somebody who is mentally stable at that point. Now, this person does not deserve to be murdered. They do not deserve to be tackled or handled in a way that is violent if they're not being violent. But law enforcement officers who are responding to those calls are really needing to understand that somebody might just be in another reality and that you need to translate that reality first before you start expecting certain behaviors from them. And I think that's a lot of the problem that we see with folks who are harmed because they're just not acting in a way that people understand. And so for me, I've worked in residential treatment facilities. I've been trained on how to de-escalate violent individuals. And I'm not saying that it's always easy. But what I can tell you is that I have been able to de-escalate teenagers who have either conduct disorders or are actively in psychosis. I've been able to de-escalate military veterans who were threatening violence against another veteran. I can't tell you how many times I've had to stand in between two Marines who were about to go to blows with each other so that I could try to de-escalate that situation. Now, I never put hands on them. I never screamed at them. I never yelled at them. I have a very calm demeanor, but that was the way that I was able to calm them down. You don't want to go into a violent situation with more violence because that is, by definition, not going to de-escalate the situation. And that's a really important factor when you are showing up in a community in a tense situation, trying not to make it worse, right? So
yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
I'm just thinking back, like when I was a teacher, you're dealing with a child, whether they have certain emotional factors that need to be handled. You're just acting up for whatever reason. Same thing, you don't go in screaming at the kid because that's going to make things so much worse. Like
Right.
That's what they tell you day one.
Right.
Like you have to be the calm, reasonable one.
Yes, that's totally it. Your job when you walk into that situation is to be the one that's emotionally regulated and demonstrate that you're the one that's emotionally regulated. And if you cannot do that, then call somebody else in to do that job for you, because meeting emotional dysregulation with more emotional dysregulation just makes things worse. And so I know there's a lot of like, of course, I think when we talk about these conversations with law enforcement, there's just inherently going to be some generalizing. Of course, there's like the not all cops disclaimer, but I also think that there is something inherently in the system of law enforcement that doesn't go deep enough to think about what you just said, John, which is that there might be emotions present. In fact, there are always going to be emotions present. We're human beings, we're not robots. So there's always going to be some kind of emotional situation happening. Now, how violent or how dangerous is that making the situation? That's going to depend on each situation that you walk into. But if you're in that role, if your job is to always be prepared to de-escalate, then that takes a certain degree of self-awareness on your part. That takes a real mindfulness of, I don't have it in me to do this right now. If I walk into that situation, my ego might be up too high, my stress or my anxiety might be up too high. I might be pissed off based on what's happening. And so if I go into that situation, I'm just bringing my anger into it. Those are not the people that should be walking into those situations. So I think it's really good that social workers are starting to come out a little bit more now. I'm seeing more conversations about, this is the training that I went through. This is how I handle nonviolent crisis intervention. And sure, is it still scary sometimes? Would it still be nice to have somebody armed at certain situations that I might need backup for? Sure. But the people with the guns on their hips who are just bringing in their energy and not worrying about what the other person might be going through, those aren't the people that should be leading into those situations. And so I think it's really cool that we're having this conversation about who else can be showing up to these calls and what are some first steps that can be taken so that shots don't have to be fired within seconds, maybe ever. Right. And I think that's what we're looking for right now, is just a more holistic approach to taking care of each other and making sure that everybody is safe. So those are some things that have been kind of going on in my mind about this as a therapist. And I'm wondering, John, I know that this is something that you've really been looking into. Not everybody will have the capacity. I think that's why we need social workers or volunteers to that nature. Not everybody's going to have the skill set or the training to do this, but it does seem like there have been places where there's been a defunding of police or a reinvesting in other areas of communities, and there's been success.
Yeah, before I get to that real quick,
Yeah.
one of the issues with American policing, there are many, but one of them is not that they're undertrained, it's how they are trained. They do a lot of training, a lot. Like, you see a lot of facts like, oh, a barber goes to school longer than a cop does. Sure, but cops do a lot of on-the-job training, but it's the type that they receive. A lot of it reinforces the notions that, like, they are the guardians of the country. They are the sole defenders of the people and of law and order, and everyone else is out to get them. And that kind of, reinforces the ideas that you see someone acting unpredictably, will say they're going to be a danger to you, and if not to you, then to someone else, and you being the one that stands between, the good and the bad, the reasonable and the unreasonable, it is your duty to make sure that everyone's protected. And how you're going to make sure that everyone's protected? Well, you got a gun on your hip. You sure can use it if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I have a lot of respect for the situations that cops do sometimes have to pull that authority on and that guardianship on. So I get that in the field, in split second moments, there's going to be, the training's going to override some other instincts that might come into play. And so I understand that. I understand that cops deal with things that I don't understand how to deal with at all because I've never been put in that position. And I think they're also like, that is a fundamental issue, that is how they're trained, because being a guardian doesn't necessarily mean you show up with force and try to get everybody to comply with what you want them to do. You're going to get resistance then. And that's where I think, and therapists are trained to, what we say is meet the client where they are. And I think there's some element of that does need to be included in law enforcement training within safety measures, right? Within a parameter of safety for them, but not being the total authority on it and understanding that we are emotional beings, that makes us unpredictable. But you can get to know that if you lean into somebody and you say, hey, buddy, what's going on? What are you experiencing? Train the law enforcement officers to know what psychosis looks like, to know what trauma looks like, and arm them with that knowledge too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, that would seem to be one of the most reasonable reforms police could undertake, is to understand like mental health crises and how to calmly de-escalate such situations.
Yeah.
Key among them would not be bringing a gun to that particular fight.
Totally. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, once a gun comes into play, like, there's automatically a, if anything becomes a life or death situation as soon as a gun's in play. It just is what it is.
And the presence of a gun in some situations can just create trauma that maybe wasn't even triggered or present before that, which is totally something that we see where it's like, now I'm scared. I wasn't scared before. I wasn't totally freaking out before. But now that you showed up with a gun on your hip, I'm in a totally different place right now.
Yeah. America has a lot of PTSD as a country regarding gun violence. So to carry one with you at all times when you're entering very tense situations, it's kind of tough to reconcile with that.
Yeah.
I feel like a gun is kind of like those sparklers that you see in like VIP clubs. Like once you see it on somebody's hip, it pops out, like you were saying, and it makes you feel a certain type of way because we're conditioned to see TV, we're conditioned to watch, these movies. Well, all guns do is shoot people. So if you bring it, like John said, and like you said, if you bring it into a situation, that's the first thing I'm going to look at and be aware of. And some mood or some energy is going to change, unfortunately.
Yeah. We have a lot of LAPD officers that ride the metro here, our train out here in LA, obviously. And as soon as they get on the train, the vibe of the car totally changes. And I find myself even just staring at the gun in their holster, just kind of like recognizing how uncomfortable it feels that that's on my commute to work. And that just the presence of the gun, even in a calm situation, creates a little bit of like on edgeness of everybody sitting on the car, especially the people of color. But I think everybody. So it's true that in and of itself is a situation changer. So I'm wondering, John, I don't know that mental health is necessarily the crux of the research that you have found, but there are situations where divesting and reinvesting in different areas of community rather than law enforcement has shown success.
Yes, at least one. So in northern Syria, kind of near the borders of Iraq and Turkey, there's this autonomous region called Rojava, and Rojava was founded in the ashes of the region after the Syrian civil war, where ISIS kind of took over the entire region. Rojava was founded on far leftist principles, so like within its constitution are a lot of ideas championed by the American anarchist Murray Bookchin. So it's very, very different than here. Their policing is interesting, especially their court system and how they deal with crimes or issues. Rojava police is split into two different entities called the Asayish and a civil defense force called the HPC. The Asayish act more like military police than anything. They protect a lot of high-level buildings. They also do some nominal, like regular police work, like arresting criminals and investigating murders and stuff like that. The HPC is basically a glorified neighborhood watch. Like, they still have AK-47s around them, but they come from their communities and they patrol their communities. They only stay in the neighborhoods where they live. In the AK-47s, I know we just talked about guns and gun violence and how they create tension situation. Northern Syria is a little different than the United States in that terrorism is still a gigantic problem there. It's an everyday fact of life that someone might be coming in to murder you or murder groups of people or set off a bomb. Like, that's just a fact of life. So it makes a little more sense for them to be armed in that situation. So the authority figures that most people interact with on a day-to-day basis are the HBC, and they're people who have strong connection with their communities. And it makes a lot of sense, especially from an anti-terrorism perspective, given that they'll be more likely to recognize, people who are different than those that normally are They're different than their neighbors. They can tell when people are acting a little funny or act like they don't quite belong. The Israeli Defense Force kind of uses a similar protocol when they're protecting their own borders and the airports and stuff like that against terrorists. They look for people who a little different. They just stick out a little bit. That's what the HBC more or less does. Both these organizations, though, the Asayish and the HBC, they're mandated in the constitution of the country to be at least 40% women. And I find that really interesting. And that's part of the reasons, like one of the things that makes Rojava so wildly unique. Everything in the country has to be at least 40% of either sex. You can't have, from like every single government apparatus has to be at least 40% women and at least 40% male.
Do you know when that became a thing?
Quite recently, I think like 2015-ish.
Interesting. I wonder what the precedent was that asked for that to happen.
Well, ISIS.
Not like that's new, but yeah.
A lot of sectarian violence and perpetrated mostly by Islamic extremists that targeted women and minorities. Also within the Rojavan Constitution, I don't have notes on this, so I'm talking a little bit out my ass here. If I'm wrong, please someone correct me. All religions, all ethnicities are expressly tolerated. Even former ISIS fighters and ISIS brides are treated with respect and treated with the understanding that they can be rehabilitated. The judge, whose name I forget now, who set up the criminal justice system in Rojava, she said as much that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, I think he's dead now, but the former leader of ISIS, he would only serve at most 20 years in prison there. This is a guy that killed hundreds of thousands, displaced hundreds of thousands more, just literally one of the worst human beings to have ever lived. And they believe that he can be rehabilitated. There was an article in the New York Times, it comes from with the title of which comes from a quote from her that basically says, retribution is for the weak. And that's the founding principle of the criminal justice system there. Retribution is for the weak. They're not there to seek vengeance. They're there to rehabilitate and make people better, reintegrate people into society.
That is powerful.
It is. When I was in college, this is going back quite a while, virtually every other every successful criminal justice system, one that didn't see high recidivism rates, was based around that same fact, rehabilitation. If you look in a lot of Western European countries, you'll see similar refrains that, like, even the worst of the worst, they're only serving maybe 15, 20 years. And that's for people who have committed mass murder. It's not like, someone who's sold a couple grams of weed.
Right.
The genuine worst people in society, they're not spending the rest of their lives in prison. They're not getting sent to death row because that kind of removes their humanity.
Ooh, so humanity is the prevailing thought there. What a novel idea. That these are human beings and that wrongdoing can be done and there can be some price to pay for it, but it doesn't have to ruin your life. And there is this idea that you are able to rehabilitate yourself, turn that around, become somebody else. I mean, that's beautiful. And that's markedly absent in the way America handles its court system.
I mean, a lot of our stuff is still based on the Quaker principles of penance, hence penitentiary. Yep. You did a crime, now you have to pay for it.
Yep.
For however long that will be. The American system's so terribly, horribly, morally bankrupt, and it's literally written into the foundations of this country. Like, before the United States was the United States, this is what we were doing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get into that a little bit more later, but it's important to really draw the distinction there. Rojava sounds really cool, and I'm going to get into one other thing that is kind of what we're talking about, but there's a specific example I want to bring up. I don't think we have the capacity to do that here, just because of cultural inertia more than anything else.
Cultural inertia is such an interesting phrase. Can you say more about what that means in comparison to what you're talking about?
So, again, at least in criminal justice world, American criminal justice system was founded on retribution. on penance, on making people pay for their crimes, whatever they may be. That's what we've been doing for 400 years. That's what our politicians have been saying for roughly as long. We're going to be tough on crime. You can't be a politician and say, hey, we're going to relax these things in regards to crime. You can't do that because you're going to lose.
Right. No room for evolution and new ideas.
No.
Right.
We've been doing the same thing year after year after year after year, generation after generation after generation. It gets really hard to stop. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, gradually picking up speed, gradually gaining mass, and to the point we're at now where to stop it, to lessen it, to turn it around it really feels almost impossible absent a revolution.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah. So these are good models, but maybe not models for America, at least as we are today.
Yeah, it's like, that if we could, that's the goal you want, right? You want to be there. You want to be able to treat everyone like a human being. That's where you want to be.
Yeah.
That's not the next step, though. You can't take one step to get there.
Right.
We're quite a ways away. You have to kind of just take those little baby steps and accept that, as horrible as it sounds, things are probably going to be shitty for a long while yet. It's the very unfortunate appraisal of the situation. I don't see a way where this, kind of turns around overnight.
So I listened to the first 3 episodes of the podcast about Rojava, and tying into what you were saying about it not fitting in American culture due to just cultural differences. I was thinking about, I haven't finished the rest of the series, but I was thinking about socialism and just the push for that. And it fit. I'm starting to believe that socialism and societies like Rojava work only because they're pocketed and because there's similarities. I think in the United States, because there are so many different races, so many different religions, so many different cultural backgrounds. I think they talked about like blood debts or like debts that have been in the families for generations kind of being an issue there.
Yes, I was going to bring that up too.
Right. Yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good.
But just that is being ever present in America, just making it, I feel, impossible for us to kind of transition into a society where we share spaces where we're more inclined to only want to share spaces with people who are similar to us, which is kind of what I think I said in the previous episode, that we're just shifting away, and anything that isn't what we want, we just block it out and we kind of go into that echo chamber. And although I'm brain dead. Okay, I'll lightly say that Rojava is kind of an echo chamber in terms of they all support the same ideals and fundamentals. That's kind of what echo chambering is, in a sense, and like on the most basic level, everyone agrees in the same type of concept of existence. And when we talked about humanity in the first episode, one of Marie Bookchin's principles was that domination of women from men is kind of like the root issue of society. And I was listening to the episode and just thinking about, women have been the most longest standing oppressed group in society since forever. And if we can eliminate that base of discriminating against women and men and women being equal, and granted now that we have all these different, I'm not sure of the PC terminology, identities or
gender identities.
Gender identities, yeah. Then maybe that will kind of take away from all the other issues we see within each other. If we can get rid of the innate issues we have of just seeing man, woman, trans, gay, lesbian, whatever, however you want to kind of shape those, then maybe we'll be more accepting as a society. Because everything else is just added on. Like religion is something you add on. Sports team. I mean, like, we picked all these weird tribes for whatever reason that don't really have any true validity in our lives and how we experience life. But I think focusing on the base kind of brings us forward. So want to hear more about Rojava and, how things ended up.
I largely agree with what you're saying there, Cliff. Anyway, in Rojava, the court system there is fascinating to me. At the base level, there's this system called the Peace and consensus committees. They exist purely at a local level. They decide what to do with people who commit minor crimes like petty theft, and they also have a large voice on women-specific issues like domestic violence and marriage, especially in relation to how such things are viewed in the Middle East and in Islamic culture in general. These things are handled at a local level to make sure punishment, if there is any, is handled in a culturally appropriate manner. If things go past these committees, the rest of the court system is very broadly similar to ours. They have, appellate courts and large regional Supreme Court of last resort. To go with what Cliff was saying, though, with blood debts, I'm going to quote here from that podcast. It's called The Women's War. It's by Robert Evans. He's a conflict journalist that's worked for Cracked and iHeartRadio. So, quoting from him here, law and order in Rojava is complicated by the unavoidable reality of tribalism. This part of Syria is filled with a number of very powerful tribes, and there are often blood debts going back decades between one tribe and another. The complicated nature of tribal politics means that any murder could, potentially, spawn a brutal series of reprisal killings that leaves numerous people dead. When a murder like this occurs in Rojava, the police do the job you'd expect and arrest the killer. But the social committee, that would be the peace and consensus committee, also springs into action to try and stop the violence from spreading. What happens next is a series of negotiations between the family of the victim and the family of the killer. The committee members act as mediators, gradually working out a way for both families to remain in the area without gunning each other down. Judge Amina, who is the one that set up the Rojavan criminal justice system, detailed one particular set of negotiations that took 6 months. So 6 months of the family of someone who was killed and the family of the person that did the killing. They had them sit down and talk to each other for 6 months to ensure that this blood debt didn't go further and that there wasn't just killing after killing after killing after killing in between these two families, Hatfield and McCoy style. So at the end of those 6 months, there was a peace arrangement that was sealed with a feast. Again, quoting from Evans, having a big public party where the family of a murderer and his victim all hang out sounds weird, but it serves a purpose of making sure there's a large public show of both sides squashing their beef. That way, if either family attacks the other, the whole community will know that those people were violating their sworn word. In the Rojavan system, violence is seen as a community problem as well as an individual problem. Judge Amita didn't consider justice to be achieved when a criminal was behind bars. She and the other architects of the system there thought it was equally important to try and heal communities racked by violent crime. End quote.
I mean, that is stunning. That is so brilliant. Like conflict resolution 101. I can't imagine what those conversations could actually be like, but I would imagine there's an amazing amount of healing that can happen in those conversations because there's going to be so many feelings. But to recognize that people, I would imagine that it's a validating experience to say, yes, we feel all of these things and they don't need to manifest in some sort of retaliation or ongoing violence, that there's maybe a better way that we can sit with this and move past this. And I love the idea of recognizing that violence is a community problem, not an individual problem. We are so quick in America to, what we call in therapy is create an identified patient, which is basically recognize that like in a family system or in a community or in a larger system, that there's a problem with the system, but we're just going to blame it on one person and have them go figure it out. And that's just simply not true. And I think that's what conversations about racial injustice in America are about today, is we're saying, stop blaming individual people, look at the community, look at the system. And I think it's brilliant and beautiful that they do that there.
It is. When I first heard it, I was just taken aback because it's so foreign. And not just because it's, half a world away, but just because it's so markedly different than what we as citizens of the United States go through in our criminal justice system. It's borderline unbelievable. And I really don't think it has, as we talked about a little earlier, I don't see it working in the United States just because Rojava was founded this way. It is written not literally, but it's written in blood there. People gave their lives, fought a civil war against probably the most evil organization that's existed since the Nazis, since Hitler's Nazis, the Third Reich, to have this society, to have this system. Now, I don't know if it'll work long-term in Rojava either, mostly because Turkey has continued to invade Rojava because they're claiming it as part of Turkey, but that's a different conversation.
Well, but it is interesting that you bring up like this is how it was founded, which again, conversations in America lately have been this is how we've been founded, which is the opposite of that. The founding of America had nothing to do with humanity and everything to do with property and taking and money, right? And the very as I talk about on my own podcast and with the Hungry Feminine and all the things that I talk about, not gender, but these sort of masculine feminine dynamics, these sort of yin yang types of dynamics, where under a masculine or yang kind of category of traits, it's very much about financial stability and acquisition and provision and protection and all of these things, which can go dark and turn into war and violence and theft. Whereas it sounds like theirs is very feminine, very yin, which is like, what is it about us communicating with each other, being vulnerable, having empathy for each other, nurturing each other, and letting that be the way that we solve our problems? You're right that it would be really hard to change, especially because America is so much in the darker part, the sort of masculine shadow of war and violence, that to go from that to this like more nurturing, empathic place, certainly not going to happen overnight, certainly not going to happen in one step, might not ever happen at all. But I think having this model is very helpful because a lot of people stick with this masculine yang ideology of America because it's all we've known and we think it's the only thing that's possible. So hearing this story is like, oh my God, it could be possible. It might not work exactly that way here or in any way here, but it's still something that we could look to try to use our imagination to re-see what we can do here in America. I think it's really important.
I agree. And to me, like, that is the best case scenario. Like, if we could get ourselves together and really work towards change, like, this is the change you would want to see. This is what you would want to have happen.
Totally. Yep.
So, John, outside of those initial, the initial 6-month example, did they have any other examples where it didn't work out, where there was tension even after the 6 months of peace and trying to reconcile?
I didn't find any. I'm sure they exist. There isn't a lot of reporting done about Rojava because it's this tiny leftist enclave in the Middle East, which no one really reports on anyway. I'm sure that exists, and I'm sure with more digging I could find it, and I will, and update in 2 weeks if I find anything. But yeah, I didn't come across anything as such. General observances of human nature would say, yeah, that's probably happened. And I too would like to know what the outcome of that was.
So from the rest of what you've listened to, are there instances where people just leave, or like, you know, they're no longer on par with everything going on, so they just pick up and leave?
Yeah, I mean, exile is a thing.
Okay.
That could be one.
Exile is kind of forced upon you,
right?
Okay,
and that,
but I guess more so in terms of people choosing to leave. Like, you know, so give an example of the 6-month experience. Like, you know what, I don't want to forgive him. I'd rather just leave.
Yeah, so in that podcast, Evans talks to a general of the Kurdish army there, and he is someone who has seen a lot of shit, like on the front lines against ISIS, against the Assad regime of Syria. He's been through it all, and he asked him basically like, how do you feel about now having all these women who previously weren't allowed to be in the military? They're your equal now. Like, constitutionally, they are your equal now. And what the guy says basically is there is no revolution without women. So I found that pretty interesting as well. Again, my information is only coming from a couple sources. I can only imagine that there are a decent number of people who, seeing how radically different Rojava is from Syria, from the rest of Kurdish autonomous region, from Turkey, they have strong feelings against the Rojavan government for their feelings of equity. And again, I don't want to say it's anti-Islamic, but it isn't Islamic fundamentalist, which a lot of people had been living under, given that that region was previously occupied by ISIS.
So it's like basically going from one extreme to the other, but their extreme is more fruitful and positive for society.
Right.
And I wonder if it only, I mean, I guess maybe it is extreme, but I wonder if it feels more extreme just because we are so used to, not only in America, but in a lot of Western countries and in the Middle East and other places, where it is that kind of like forceful domination of will rather than, I mean, we can't even get people to, on a smaller scale, honor women here in America, but over there they're like, there's no revolution without women. Like
Right.
that's a huge difference just because it goes against everything we've ever said.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, for years, really dating back to like the rise of ISIS in, I don't know, 2008 ish, when the Kurdish people were attempting to form their own country, they had a lot of propaganda involving women in their military. Like, they would really just pose their most beautiful female soldiers with guns shooting at terrorists and plaster that shit everywhere to get people really intrigued and involved in a lot of Western societies. Be like, oh, look, they treat people equally there. Whether they did or not is debatable, but they sure acted like they did. And that was such a difference from Islamic fundamentalist culture found throughout the rest of the region and in Ba'athist Iraq, which is something else I want to get to in a minute here. So yeah, like the idea of women at the forefront has existed in that specific region for a while. It really did start off as pure propaganda, but as the war against ISIS and others took its toll, that's who was left. You couldn't have women just staying at home and dealing with and taking care of the home front. They needed them to fight because there wasn't enough men or anyone else because they were all dying.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to World War II here.
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like when they were talking about the women in the military, I was thinking about our own military, and I was thinking about the most recent case with Vanessa Gulen, I believe, who was, from what we believe, murdered by other people in her squad. And just trying to understand just American psyche in terms of women who are willingly here to stand by your side, to fight with you in the army and in military service and police work, but still not being able to get the same respect that men get, even when it's a choice on their end to actively do this versus being initiated into it or being forced into it.
Yeah, I think that's such a tough thing. And, the military is almost the United States military is this microcosm of all of the ideologies that are ingrained in American culture, like times 1,000 in the military. And of course, a lot of that makes sense. But there's this, yes, a disrespect toward women, a feeling like a woman's not supposed to be here, even though she's doing the thing that I did, which was say, I want to fight for my country. I'm going to put on the uniform. I'm going to go to the front lines. It's much different in the sort of boys' club sectors of the military where women start to become a threat to them in that sense. There's the first of all, the prevalence of sexual abuse in the military is staggering, and it doesn't only happen to women; it also happens to men too, which I think is also part of like an ideology that's toxic about ownership, about aggression, about power. It's hardly ever about sex. It's usually about the former things. And women are still representative of something that we want to dominate in this country. So it doesn't matter if she's got on a uniform. In fact, maybe even more so if she's got on a uniform, there's going to be this attitude of like, who the hell do you think you are kind of thing. I'm not sure that that's exactly what happened to her. It's certainly a lot. I worked with military veterans for a while, and I heard those narratives. And I heard those narratives coming from the mouths of men who were good people, but got caught up in that narrative and additionally felt the pressure of what it was to be a soldier or a Marine in our military, and the ego boost that they have to give themselves, up against their brothers in uniform, and how they need to feel kind of tough and noble and all of these things. It just turns them into, well, it turns them into people that maybe take opportunities that they shouldn't be and that they otherwise wouldn't. So yeah, there's definitely it's very toxic, and it's very hard to reverse because, like we were saying before, that is how America was founded. And Cliff, you even said it, like women are that's been like the longest running oppression everywhere for a long time. It's really hard to look at women consciously in all aspects as equals.
Yeah,
I don't
and
know. I don't know if that speaks to what you were saying, but that kind of came up for me.
It does. I mean, I also I understand I see the two sides to it. I understand the biological aspect of it, and biologically and physically, there are differences that we're just aware of. I just don't. It's just frustrating kind of process the history of how other has been treated in the military and throughout the country and police departments. It's how Hispanics and Blacks. And again, I'll go back to women being the initial oppressed group. I guess women kind of set the standard, and they get the first wave of oppression that men are willing to kind of dish out.
Yeah, but I think you're right about that across the board too, because I worked with veterans who were being threatened to be deported because they didn't have citizenship. It's like, you served in the Marine Corps for 4 years. You fought for this country. You literally went overseas and were deployed. And how does that not just come with citizenship? How does that come with disrespect? Black people that serve in the military, they still face police brutality on the streets. It's like, I served my country. What else can I do here?
So again, in my mind, Rojava is kind of like best case scenario. If we were to reform police, if we were to defund police, whatever, this is, in my head, ideally what it would turn into. A couple weeks ago, I had a brief conversation with Cliff, I think over Instagram. I was talking about, like, broadly, what would the end of policing look like? And the first thing that sprung to my mind is America historically has been really, really, really desperately, dangerously bad about providing people who have lost a job with things to do. Minus, the New Deal programs, like, just tragically bad. You look at everyone from coal miners to manufacturers, just awful. So there are about 700,000 police officers in the United States. A lot of people calling for, the abolition of police in general. To take that place would be you would have some nominal levels of policing with people, investigating murders, but a lot of it would also be therapists and social workers going out to de-escalate situations. The thing that kind of dawned on me was, well, what do you do with the cops that lost their job? And what sprang up to me was, well, do you guys remember the Iraq War? Remember when that happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we remember.
It never stopped happening. After the fall of Baghdad in 2003, Iraq went through the process known as de-Baathification. The Ba'ath Party was the ruling party in Iraq during Saddam Hussein's reign. To get anywhere in Iraq, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. Literally, to be a teacher, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. To run a factory, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. When the United States came in and overthrew the government there, one of the first things they did was basically exile everyone who had been a member of the Ba'ath Party. Everybody. From, again, teachers to people who knew how to run a business. Thrown out. They weren't allowed to hold any positions anymore. Certainly not in government. This resulted in like 400,000 people losing their jobs. Among them were the entire military of Iraq. Everyone. From the lowliest private to the highest general. Some of them, you could probably say, deserve to lose a job and probably deserve to be tried at The Hague for war crimes. But they fired everyone. Every single one. With that, people lost jobs. They not only lost their jobs, they lost pensions, barred from any future government employment, and barred from any future government employment. However, the army, they were allowed to keep one thing. Do you want to take a guess as to what that was?
Weapons.
Yes! They were allowed
to. I didn't know I was a guess.
They were allowed to keep their guns. So you have roughly 100,000 out-of-work military personnel with guns who are barred from getting another job.
Before disaster, yeah.
Out of that grew ISIS and the modern terrorist movement as we know it today. A former intel officer of the old Iraqi army, Brigadier General Hassan Dulaimi, he said there are hundreds of thousands of people like him. The people in charge of military operations in the Islamic State were the best officers in the former Iraqi army, and that is why the Islamic State beats us in intelligence and on the battlefield. Another old Iraqi army officer said, the Americans bear the biggest responsibility. When they dismantled the army, what did they expect those men to do? They were out in the cold with nothing to do, and there was only one way for them to put food on the table. The reason I bring this up, if even a large fraction of the police were to lose their jobs, even a tenth, that's 70,000 people. Well, yeah, they probably wouldn't be barred from future employment. They're still out of a job that comes with great pay, great benefits, an amazing pension, and a lot of power. Something they are used to, something they are trained to have. If they're thrown out on the street from that, where do you think it goes? Not only that, currently the United States is seeing a huge upswing in right-wing militia groups, armed militia groups. You see that, like the Proud Boys, a lot of these separatist boogaloo movements. It's impossible to say how many police are connected with them currently, but a 2009 Department of Homeland Security report said that federal law enforcement agencies in general, the FBI, the Marshals, the ATF, are aware that extremists have infiltrated state and local law enforcement agencies, and that there are people in law enforcement agencies that may be sympathetic to these groups. The Plainview Project, which is something that collects Facebook comments made by about 3,000 current and former police officers in 8 cities, suggested that nearly 1 in 5 of the current officers identified in this study made public posts or comments that appear to endorse violence, racism, and bigotry. Cops thrown on the street, a lot of them are in some way at least broadly aware of right-wing militia groups that, are sympathetic to the cause of the police that don't want to lose their job. It's not hard to envision a scenario in which people that lose their jobs will join these groups. A lot of them already have similar ideologies, at least broadly. To put someone in a very tough situation where they've lost everything they've worked for, wrongly or rightly, I'm not debating here whether or not cops should lose their jobs or not. There really needs to be a plan in place, or else things could get really, really bad really, really quickly. And I don't trust the US government as it stands to have such a plan in place, especially given that a lot of law enforcement agencies are run not from a federal level, but from a state and local level. I don't see a huge, ray of sunshine here where if you abolish police, as quite a few want, or you defund them to the point where there are a lot fewer police officers, how we transition these people back into, I guess I can call regular society, or into different jobs. We have a horrible track record of it, and you're cutting them off from so much of what they're used to. Again, I don't see it as a huge leap of logic to make where they join with whatever their local militia group is. Perhaps I'm being a little bit conspiracy-minded here, but it just seems like a likely progression to me.
I agree with you on both counts that it's important and that it is likely to not happen effectively in the United States. We don't even do it with our military veterans, and we expect that they're going to discharge from the military and return to civilian life. And apart from the Navy, although even there's some questionable stuff, there isn't really anything that's provided to veterans to reacclimate to civilian life after everything that they've experienced, including the need to have that power and to be trained on how to use that power and, harness it the right way. So I absolutely agree. And I think it's the same thing that we've been talking about, which is we have to look at it from a community perspective, not an individual perspective. Whoever these law enforcement agents are, good or bad or whatever, if they're impacted by this, we as a community do have a responsibility to help them reintegrate into some other part of the community, which might be really difficult. And I can absolutely see that becoming, them sort of joining these insurgent groups and taking out their frustration there.
It feels like police are the newest victims of cancel culture. And you look at the internet and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and they find people who do things that are taboo. And then they swarm, they dox them, they find their place of employment, they tell on them and get them fired. And I just want to pretext this as a base. Like, what do you think these people are going to feel like and be like once they get fired for just voicing their opinions, regardless of the content, right? If I'm a conservative and I find out a bunch of liberals galvanized on Twitter to get me fired, I'm going to shift and become more extreme. I'm going to be pissed off and I'm going to want retribution, right? At least, I mean, that's me. Part, I don't believe in turning the other cheek. So maybe that's just me talking, but I believe this is kind of part of the narrative. And you take it another step level, like John was saying with the police and like you were saying with the police, you're going to do what you know, what's easiest for you, right? They're private military groups. There's this article I read in 2015, and they were talking about special conservators of peace. They're citizens, private citizens, well, authorized to carry guns. They're authorized to make arrests. They have some type of badge that the city gives them, and they're just private police organizations. So if people think that regular policing is awful, imagine when these private militias or private SCOP groups get contract jobs to roam the streets, right? And since we've gotten rid of the police, who's going to respond and who's going to stop them? Who's going to tell them that? Who's going to push back on them, right? They're private citizens. I mean, we're going to upend that again. Like it's not realistic, and people I mean, this is very much the culture we're in, unfortunately, that people are just pushing and saying things without thinking of long-term consequences. So to John's point, to your point, without a plan, without finding a way to kind of reintegrate these officers back into society, those who, I mean, granted, I feel like certain cops, going back to their books, maybe they should face prison time, and maybe that'll lessen some of the criminals, some of the police criminals out in the streets, and the other officers who, if we get to the point where we want to truly abolish policing as we know it, I think that's a different term. We shouldn't abolish police. We should abolish policing as we know it and restructure it. Earlier, when we were talking about mental health and having officers respond to situations, like, why can't it be like my vision? And I said this in a previous episode, was just, for the most part, having in an ideal and fair society, everyone does a little bit of policing work. That's what, in a small community, everyone's aware of each other. Everyone has some type of responsibility to keep their community safe and clean. Makes us all feel more accountable and like we're a part of something. And even with that, there can be subdivisions, right? So it isn't every officer doesn't like, there's regular police work, there's detective, there's SWAT. Why not have a specific mental health department? So like when there's a disturbance with someone who has a mental issue, we send that group, we send that subsect of policing, and then maybe you send one officer as backup outside versus just, these are the standard faces you see for every single incident, every single activity, no matter what form of escalation or level it's on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also appreciate that you brought up the cancel culture piece of this, because I do think I've been saying this since the Me Too movement, which is like, when people are out of line, when people are uneducated, when people are doing things wrong, we don't want to necessarily, I mean, there are extremes. I think the whole thing is a spectrum, but we don't want to cut everybody off at the knees and then say, well, you did that, like we did that because you're bad. Now you go figure it out. Because you're right. That just perpetuates suffering, which then perpetuates anger, which then perpetuates division and then can create war. And so we are responsible to each other, whether or not we agree with each other. I think if in America we had a little bit of faith that the bad cops would actually be held accountable and put behind bars for the misdeeds that they did, then we might actually be a little bit more open to having a conversation about whoever's left that might be losing their job and how we want to support them. But I, like John, kind of struggle to have faith in the American government to plan that out, to even understand the need for that and the nuances in that need. And so it makes it really messy. But canceling people and having them lose their jobs, I mean, I get it. I get the equity of it, right? To say, if this is how you're going to parade around the world, if you're going to be a Karen and try to take down other people, you don't get the comfort of going to work and getting a paycheck and living your life. But can there also be another step that's like the rehabilitation piece, which I think is important for everybody, whether your crime was an actual crime or whether your crime was maybe a crime of morality?
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I mean, as you said, it's very much a spectrum. People are allowed to make mistakes. They're allowed to say dumb shit on the internet. Like, I certainly have. I've been on Twitter since I was far too young, and I'm still on Twitter, much to my chagrin. Like, you're going to say something dumb, and society does move quickly, especially like the internet. What was okay 5 years ago isn't necessarily something that's okay today. And largely that's probably a good thing. A lot of things that are no longer okay are for, beneficial reasons, because they whatever you're saying might hurt someone else. So you should probably stop saying that. Okay, that makes sense. But not everyone catches up with that. And to get someone fired or to call someone out at a large scale that may not be aware of it, but are open to learning and further education just does seem kind of flatly wrong and like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to the idea of the zero tolerance for everything that isn't what I believe in. It's just it's a huge hypocritical cycle, and it's a lack of self-awareness in terms of like going back to the idea of people saying stupid shit. Like I get that, I see it all the time, but I never have a desire to be like, you shouldn't be allowed to tweet because you're stupid and you're a bigot. Like I think you should be allowed to do that. For one, it allows people to see who you truly are as a person, and then it allows those same people to avoid you like the plague, or just distance themselves from you. I think that's one of the benefits of freedom of speech. Learning. I mean, how many people are disconnecting from each other? How many people are starting to ignore each other? How many people have been blocking and unfollowing each other these past couple of months because we've become so politicized? I mean, even going into this election, how many family members are going to no longer speak? How awkward is Thanksgiving and Christmas going to be this year? And moving forward, right? We're not willing socially. I say we always mean socially. Socially, we've just transitioned to this place where if I can't get you to agree with me the second I say something, then you're against me. I don't want to be involved with you. And that's okay to an extent. I mean, it's okay in the sense of not sharing ideologies. It's okay not to share an ideology with someone, but to want to shut someone down and tell them they have no place and they don't deserve a platform and they don't deserve a voice. The same thing could be said and done to you. And I think I feel like no one ever sees that. No one ever sees the mirror aspect of you're talking shit that someone doesn't like also, but no one's attacking you. No one's galvanizing and trying to get you out of here. I view it mostly as leftists doing it to conservatives. There could be other instances, but from mostly what I see, it feels like that's the direction it usually goes in.
I've seen a lot of it coming from the left more recently, but I certainly had a lot of personal experiences with it coming from the right before that. And I think for me, like the limit that I have is if you're not willing to have a conversation, then I don't know what we're going to be doing here. But you certainly don't have to agree with me. And certainly on top of that, if you don't agree with me, it doesn't mean that I want to try to like ruin your life and kind of take you down. And not to get too psychoanalytic, but there's a lot of projection that happens there. To that point, Clifford, that you brought up is like the lack of self-awareness. It's so much easier to point at somebody else and say, there is my enemy, let me destroy that person, rather than looking in the mirror and having to deal with what I might consider to be my own demons, because we're all human and we all have ideologies, we all have personality quirks, we all have stuff about us that we do not like and do not approve of. And instead of facing that with ourselves and doing the work to get a little bit more conscious about who we are and how we show up in the world, it's just so much easier to say, look, there's the asshole over there. Now, if I destroy him, I'm righteous because I took out the bad guy. When the truth is, and I mean, this podcast is called The Gray Podcast. It's like, what's in the middle? There's hardly that extreme of black and white, good, bad. It's, can we come to some sort of agreement based on humanity? But the humanity's lacking.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cliff. You're good.
Okay. Like I've been having this argument with a friend of mine this whole week, talking about black and gray and wins and losses. It's draining, but the concept just rests on like black and white just kind of being the reality of what things are. Like there's just a socially understood reality of what is and what isn't. And the gray is the dialogue. The gray is learning to understand why something is black and why something is white. And on a social level, why do I personally, I want to explain to you why I personally view things in this specific light. And that's the gray. And we need more of the gray. We need more of the conversation. We need more of the dialogue. We need more of the, I'll even say, tension-filled dialogue. I want to speak to conservatives. I want to speak to racists. I want to speak to people who have opposing views because I want to understand better. And understanding, and mostly in the sense of, okay, how do I take what they've shared with me and how they gained their perspective, and how do I flip it so that I can find a way to unlearn that for other people. I think the more we kind of learn why and how people come into these perspectives, that's what makes it easier to deconstruct them down the line.
Totally. And that there's in that tension, in that conversation, in that gray, there's an opportunity for education, which some people don't want and other people really do. And I think there are a lot of people that have Twitter accounts that maybe say things, or Instagram accounts, say things that they shouldn't have and get canceled immediately for it when they show up and they're actually quite willing to learn and listen. I think Deshaun Jackson's coming to mind for me now. And I tread carefully here because that's not the content of what he posted is not something for me to speak on either from an anti-Semitic point or just anti-Blackness in general. But what I see of that human being is he said something he shouldn't have, kind of put his foot in his mouth, and has been apologetic and has been trying to understand what he did wrong, and clearly has been accepting a lot of invitations from people to have deeper conversations about this so that he can understand what happened and why he thought it was okay to say that. And I think that is a much better approach than just canceling him and saying he's a piece of crap, we can't ever mess with him again.
Yeah, I mean, the thing he posted is it is anti-Semitic. It continues or perpetuates, right? That's what I was looking for. Jewish stereotypes of like Jewish people running the world through secretive means. It was a quote misattributed to Adolf Hitler, and he posted it in a positive light, which you automatically, whenever you see Hitler, you should probably just stop.
Totally. It's egregious. It's egregious.
Yeah, it was real bad. But as you're saying, like, he has been very apologetic, including one of the single best lines in any apology I've ever read in my life. Adolf Hitler was a bad person, and I know it. Quote from Deshaun Jackson, which I find hilarious.
Put that on the shirt.
Adolf Hitler, question mark, bad. Yes. And to the broader point of, like, leaving room for education and not just firing him, the Eagles didn't cut him. What they did, and I'm going to read off their press release that they put out recently. It says, quote, "Today we have penalized Deshaun for conduct detrimental to the team. He accepted these consequences and apologized. In our many conversations with him, it has also been made clear that this is only the beginning. We have discussed a concrete plan for how we and he can heal moving forward. He understands that in order to remain on the team, he must also commit to supporting his words with actions. We have been encouraged by his desire to educate himself, but we all understand there is still a lot of work to be done. We will continue to assist Deshaun in this process, and we'll also know that all of us in our organization need to listen and learn more about things that are unfamiliar or uncomfortable to us." End quote. That's from the Philadelphia Eagles. So to what we've all kind of been saying here, I think that's probably like one of the better examples I've seen of somebody taking their time to work with someone to educate them so they no longer think or say or do these stupid things.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important component of it because people can apologize. I think, again, I keep bringing up the Me Too movement, but there were a lot of people that were just sort of like, I'm sorry if you felt that way, or I'm sorry if I misunderstood. But anyway, right. And it's like, no, like an apology also has to come with changed action. And there can be a performative approach to that for sure. And I don't know Deshaun Jackson. I don't know if he's authentically arriving to these opportunities to learn. But it certainly seems like he is. I watched his apology video on Instagram. And I feel like as a therapist, I'm a pretty good judge of character to tell if somebody's just saying it because they think they're supposed to say it or not. And that seemed authentic to me. Now, of course, I'm not the be all end all of that decision, nor if that's enough, if him apologizing and wanting to do better is enough. But I think, especially in terms of, I guess I keep bringing up the Me Too movement because that's the area where I do feel like I get to be a little bit more judge and jury as a woman. I still think cancel culture has been really detrimental in that area, and we lose people instead of potentially gaining allies, which is really what I think we should be looking for at the end of the day.
You're an Eagles fan, right, John? So like you would know their history, I'm assuming.
I wouldn't consider myself a fan, but I live amongst the fans of the team. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So I asked this not to compare oppression, but do you remember what their response was to Riley Cooper?
Yes, they gave him $25 million.
Okay. So I bring this up. So I think it was 2015, 2013. Riley Cooper I'm not sure if he still plays for them. I don't really follow football that much.
No, he's been out of the league for a while. He wasn't very good.
Okay. So he played for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I don't remember again, unfortunately, where he was, but he made a comment was, I'll come out of these stands and I'll fight every nigger in here. So going through the Deshaun Jackson pushback, I just, looked through old articles to see what the response was to Riley Cooper. And I don't see that the same energy towards him. And going back, I guess, to the idea of cancel culture, and granted, cancel culture is kind of the standard now. Like there's no room for error, and things are a bit lenient now. It seems exacerbated. And it seems like there's this huge media push to kind of really demonize Deshaun Jackson. So earlier today, I did a Google search, and I was trying to find the quote. He posted it on Instagram. It got deleted. And going through Google and going through all the sheets, it took me maybe 5 page results to find what he posted before. And I was thinking about just the idea of this language and and labeling people, essentially. Right. So when you search Deshaun Jackson, all you see Deshaun Jackson anti-Semitic. And that's all you see. You don't as a reader who's new to it, it's difficult to find exactly what he said. And I think it's I want to say unfair. And I'll say that because it's suppressing the ability for the reader to kind of judge, or I guess kind of fill in the gray, right? It becomes black and white. And like I've never really known I've had a general idea of what anti-Semitic was, and I thought it was like related to hatred or bigotry toward Jews, but it's really just being critical and prejudging them. And listening to that, and we talked about the other two. John, you remember the name of the other 2 players you brought up? I forgot.
Malcolm Jenkins and Steven Jackson, who's actually a former NBA player.
They kind of chimed in and put their 2 cents in, and they've kind of been put into the mix with Deshaun Jackson also. And I was just wondering, like, why is there a label for criticizing anyone or criticizing a specific group? And I say that in the sense of going back to my belief that anti-Semitism being like some type of active hateful act. I don't think it's fair to create a term to not judge people or to not critique people, because then it makes it so that they aren't open to criticism. And I think that's kind of unfair. And I think that limits the ability to see the bigger picture. I mean, like I look at, and granted, I understand the idea of the conspiracy aspect and not creating this narrative that Jewish people run the world. I totally get that.
I think that's important to talk about, though, because I mean, it is anti-Semitic because literally millions of Jews were and have been killed over the past several thousand years.
Oh no, I'm not denying that
conspiracies. It's not. You can't really understate that. I mean, probably second only to women. The Jewish people are the second longest oppressed group of people in human history. They don't go more than a few decades without some pogrom somewhere killing them or kicking them out. Like, these stereotypes come from that. They were created to paint Jewish people as the other. So when things are going bad, they can point to them and say, oh, they're the ones controlling it. Let's go after them. Like, that's where these come from, and that's why they're painful for people of the Jewish faith. At least I disagree kind of where you're coming from here, because I don't think it's fair to say like anti-Semitism means that the Jewish people are unreceptive to criticism, so much as criticism they face in their past has led unfair criticism at that, or frankly criticism that comes from a place of pure falsehoods, has led to the deaths of millions of them.
Right. I'm not denying that what he said was anti-Semitic. I totally believe that it was moronic. I'm looking more into what, I guess, kind of tying into cancel culture and where we've kind of gone into society, that you're not allowed to criticize a group of people for anything. I mean, we've transitioned into the point where you're not allowed to, I mean, if you bring up what's going on in the West Bank, in Gaza with Israel and Palestine, you're not really allowed. There's pushback, and you can get labeled as anti-Semitic. My point is more so that it's the traditional and core meaning of it has kind of become dissuaded due to cancel culture, and any type of critique outside of what the base of it was has shifted. And I think it's come to the point where any type of review or opinion that isn't appealing to isn't appealing towards Jewish people is viewed as anti-Semitic. And I think that's more my point of that being wrong, where everything is offensive, everything.
Cliff, a lot of what I'm hearing you say is that it's like problematic, maybe not problematic, but it hurts conversations that could be helpful if, like you were saying with Deshaun Jackson, you were Googling him and you could not find his original statement, but what you could find was the label anti-Semitic. So it's almost like the headline now becomes the judge and jury rather than you doing your own research to like see, what did he say? What does it mean? What is my reaction to it? Why is that my reaction to it? All of the sort of self-reflection that we can have in those moments to learn, and then learn what he needs to learn so that we can, offer him resources to get better too. All of that gets lost if the label becomes the priority in the conversation.
Right. Absolutely. It's if he has the opportunity to, he's aware of what he posted. And if we're pushing the narrative that he needs to educate himself or learn more, then I, as an individual, need to be able to see what he wrote and say, okay, that's wrong. And then kind of, if we're making this a social, social show, right, where all the articles are like, this is who he's talking to. These Jewish players reached out to him. He's connecting with these people. He's meeting with these people. I should be able to be part of that experience. I should be able to know what was written, what was posted, rather, know that, okay, this doesn't have validity. I do my own fact checking. This doesn't have any validity, and be part of the learning process. But if we're just saying he's this, and we're not creating opportunity to learn more outside of his opportunity, then it limits our potential to kind of communicate and avoid the mistakes that he's made also.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. And John, I agree with you too, that like there's problematic conversations happening, and we do need to, like, I think it's important to use the term racist when we're talking about a racist, or somebody, maybe not calling a person a racist per se, but calling an ideology or a thought or a statement racist. Because we need to kind of understand the severity of the harm that it can cause, which is the same thing as anti-Semitism. But I agree with you, Cliff, that maybe it's a media thing, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's a Twitter type of, Twitter culture where it's like, we've labeled him, now we've shut him down, now he's dead to us, let's move on to the next person, which does not actually contribute to better behavior and better, less problematic insight and opinions about people. So it's tough, but I think there is a need for the gray there too. I mean, I think there always is. John, I don't know if that makes sense. If that,
like I said, I totally agree with both points, and I just want to reiterate that I'm not denying what it was, but even going to the idea of racism, right? People get called a racist for any type of misstep without. We're throwing labels around a lot and loosely, and I think that's also kind of part of the issue. Also, there's just I'm aware of this word. You did something that fits in with what the narrative of this word is, and that becomes your label. And then once you get that label, it sticks with you, right? We talked about tweets from 5 years ago, tweets from 10 years ago. That comes back, and that's all people want to remember you for, because no one's willing to set the time aside to have the dialogue, have the conversation, or take the next step to. And granted, we've noted that he is being educated and he is having conversations with people, and I think that's because he has the capital, he has the access, he has the connections. But on an everyday, where it really matters, I think is for everyday common people, for people who are not millionaires and billionaires, people who are not athletes, people who are not celebrities, because we're more closer to reality, and we're more closer to these social conversations and interactions. And I want to imagine we're more likely to slip up due to being more I guess, more social.
That's interesting. Well, I think it's also interesting that you brought up before that I mean, you didn't use these words. I think I used them in my head, but that perhaps he's also being used as an example because right now in these modern times, we cannot let certain behaviors go without calling them out and then maybe calling the person in for dialogue. And so perhaps the Eagles really put out this amazing statement about it to hold him accountable. And they really seem like they're like, he's doing okay, but he's got to do better. And we're going to hold him accountable forever for this, that might just be a sign of the modern times that we're in.
I mean, I always hope so. Like it's, I even think about like posts where police are doing good acts. And I wonder, okay, is that just the cop innately doing that because that's who they are? Or is it progress and the cops are aware and changing? And so I always question, and it's relative realistically, right? Because we can't really be aware of what's in someone's heart. And on the other aspect, it's wondering if the movement worked, if progress is actually happening. So you never really know. And some people you hope for the best. You hope that, okay, this cop has changed. He's a great human being. You hope for the best, but then you see other content that kind of just reiterates that things aren't getting any better. So I hope and I want to believe that the Eagles put out this statement and that there is some type of accountability that he gets held to, and that all people get held to in the future. And for me, it kind of feels like a pick and choose thing. And I don't want to make this too racial, but I think about I do the Riley Cooper example again. I think of Ben Roethlisberger from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who was accused of I think sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And there's a leniency when it comes to white athletes. I feel like that's kind of a narrative that's been around, and whiteness in general. So when I see response to Black athletes committing certain acts, I question it. And granted, there have been a lot of great responses, like Michael Vick, for perfect example. But I still question it, and I guess that's part of the Black paranoia.
Which, they say you're only paranoid until you're proven right. So, I mean, I think there's a history of evidence that backs up that paranoia. Although I appreciate that you do still proceed with caution when you say that, because you're not entirely sure and you want to keep it open, because that's what all of this is about, nuance, right?
Right.
I think it's important. Yeah.
I do wonder too, like with Ben Roethlisberger, with Riley Cooper, with any of the others, if what they did happened, in 2020, how the situation would be different. There's a much higher chance they would have been out of the league and blackballed for their actions or their words. I mean, I do feel we've come quite a ways since then. Like Ben Roethlisberger's stuff was like 2007-ish, and Riley Cooper was like 2013. I do wonder if that happened this year or last year, what the outcome would be. I know it's not super relevant to the conversation here, but I do think it is kind of, it's just a thought. Like, I don't know that they would still have jobs, or would have held their jobs, rather.
I definitely think it is, but I also feel like it's media deciding and picking and choosing what to like really put out there. And granted, social media has become its own news source realistically. But with suppressing information, suppressing tweets, and I'm not saying that this is what happens to suppress what white people do in society, and even on this small scale when it comes to athletes. I totally get your point. I understand that it is very relative to the times and where we go in society, and it's me questioning whether we're making progress. But I also always go back to the idea of, okay, is media going to push this out? Are there going to be 50 articles from 50 websites in a single day as soon as news of this hits?
Yeah, so where's the pressure coming from? Who's tapping into public opinion, and how is the public going to feel about it? Is it performative, or is it actually because we're learning something? I think those are all valid questions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other part of it is too, because of the pandemic, like there's not a whole lot going on in the world of sports. So when a sports person does something very controversial, in Deshaun Jackson's case, like it's going to be the topic because it's the only one to talk about. So there's that too.
It's a great point. Stephen A. Smith has not had a lot to talk about lately, and so he gets on and talks about this, and he gets paid for the day. Totally.
Yeah, very valid point. I totally agree with that.
So we've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff, which is to be expected when we're talking about news and current events and social exchanges during these times. And I newly joined Twitter, although I shouldn't say newly because I used to tweet a lot back in the day, like when Twitter first started. But the other day I was on Twitter for the first time since the Obama administration and was getting very stressed as I was reading through all of the tweets that people had. And I thought, oh no, what did I do? What world did I walk into? It is a drastically different environment. And that's not to say that in like 2015, it wasn't chaotic, but damn, there's a lot going on there. And I tried to walk into that thinking, okay, this is where people speak their mind. This is where people ask for the things that they want. This is where people challenge the president who uses tweet primarily as a communication tool. This is where it could get annoying, it could get overwhelming, but it's also the voice of people. And I just thought about, the protests that I've been going to these last couple of months and how cool it is, even if it's Twitter, even if it's a little strange and a little obnoxious, to be able to have a place to have your protest and speak your mind and say what you think the world should look like or your country or community should look like. And I know that I spent a lot of time yesterday listening to protest songs because that was our top 5 for the week. That was the thing that we wanted to talk about in terms of like sharing our favorite things related to that. And I was listening to these protest songs while I was on Twitter, and I started to be like, yeah, damn the man. Like, say the things that you need to say. It's not a song, but it's a tweet, and maybe it'll get, some sort of impact. And so, I mean, if you guys have any warnings for me on Twitter, I'll take it. But we could also start talking about some cool music that does the same thing.
Yeah, rule number 1 to live a happy life is never tweet.
Well, too late. There we go. My life is ruined, I guess.
As someone who's been on Twitter most of the time, taking a couple breaks here and there since like 2011, don't.
Just don't do it. Well, go ahead, Cliff. Tell me.
My suggestion is to, let's say, majority of the actual people you follow, make sure that they have similar views as you. Make that be kind of a echo chamber. Follow like 1 or 2 people who are a bit more radical than you, and then follow 1 person who's far extreme from you, and the rest just make it news. I think that I find that being my best balance.
Wow.
So when I read the extreme views and it pisses me off, I read something positive, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. People are protesting. People are doing what needs to be done. So that's kind of I'll do a percentage breakdown for the next episode.
That was pretty amazing, that little strategy that you have. I could do that. Percentages would be helpful though. So if you could work on that report, maybe send me an Excel spreadsheet. That would be super helpful. Well, so did you guys get into any cool protest music that we're wanting to share? How do we want to do this? Like roundtable top 5?
So this is our first official top 5 list. For this season, our theme is just going to be songs. Jessica, wow. Vanessa came up with a great concept of focusing on protest songs, which just fits in perfectly. And I guess I'll lead. So actually, to start. Actually, no. I'll save this tidbit for the end, depending on what your songs are. So I'll start with my songs, and this is in ranking order. Okay. Number 5 is "Get Up, Stand Up" by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Just a nice melody. It's not too. I feel like it's a good transition. And I kind of feel like my top 5 goes through that phase where it starts off. It's nice and mellow. You feel energy, and then when you reach the peak, when you reach number 1, you're just pissed off and ready to burn shit. So "Get Up, Stand Up" is kind of like the intro music. It's what you do to bring everyone in the crowd together. You bring everyone over. They're playing it. People getting ready to march. Like that's my intro. Number 4 is MIA, Paper Planes. And it isn't a protest song per se, but the content is about just, fuck oppression and fuck the system. It's pushing back against negative views of immigration. And I was reading about it a bit more today, and the chorus when she goes, actually, I'm not going to sing it, but all I want to do is... You
don't want to make the cash register noises, Cliff?
Yeah. The cash, yeah, please do that. All I want to do is do all the sounds. You got to do the guns, the gunshots, and the cash register. So that's all I want to do is... You're not going to do it? Okay. That, yeah. So the chorus is, all I want to do is gunshots and cash register, take your money. And it represents people having this negative view that all immigrants want to do is kill and rob and steal when they come to your country. So I think that's a dope way to kind of say, fuck closed-minded people. Number 3 is Kendrick Lamar, I. And again, not so much protest per se, but it represents like my base, which is just focusing on self, looking in at yourself and just being more aware of what's going on. And there's this quote from a 2015 Rolling Stone article where he talks about writing the song. And the quote goes, I've woken up in the morning and felt like shit, feeling guilty, feeling angry, feeling regretful. As a kid from Compton, you can get all the success in the world and still question your worth. My partner, Jason Estrada, told me, if you don't attack it, it will attack you. If you sit around moping, feeling sad and stagnant, it's going to eat you alive. I had to make that record. It's a reminder. It makes me feel good. And I feel like that should be the base of just existing. Like, instead of being mopey, instead of being down, instead of being stuck in place, look into yourself, look at what's going on in the world and kind of find your place in it. And I think that's the root of protesting. Even within a crowd, and even with the unity and the unison and chant, still understanding that I'm an individual and what I want is as important as the people who are with me. Number 2 is Tupac. Tupac, they don't give a fuck about us. And that's just the reality, I feel, as for everyone, right? For everyone who isn't in the top tier club, we're just part of the system, right? We're just pawns in the game of whatever this world experience is. And the lyrics, the energy, I mean, Tupac has a bunch of songs that I think kind of fit in with the narrative of saying, fuck this country, fuck oppression. And I think that's kind of my favorite song of his that deals with the necessary energy and it's the realization of the, I guess, kind of being self-aware also. Like, he talks about, if I want to, if I choose to ride thug until the day I die, no one gives a fuck about us. But if I choose to rise, a hero in the children's eyes, now they give a fuck about us. So when people are just keeping to themselves and doing the stereotypical things that they want the common person to do, I guess, no one cares. No one cares if we're shooting each other. No one cares if we're stabbing. No one cares if we're robbing. No one cares about all these small world problems. But the minute we infiltrate, I say we, I guess I mean hip hop and black people, black culture, black media, black entertainment infiltrates the world of whiteness and what the standard for white America is, then it's an issue. And number 1 song is Michael Jackson, They Don't Care About Us. And it's, I think this is like one of my favorite songs of his, just in terms of energy. I mean, I feel like socially we've been conditioned to view Michael Jackson as just this soft-spoken singing man who dances and does all this, nice, fun stuff. But the energy in the song and the original video, which was in a prison in, I want to say either Rio or what's the other city that I can't remember in Brazil? What's the other major city in Brazil? Rio or...
Oh, shit. Brasilia is the capital.
Right. Why I can't... That's... I'll get back to it. Say it again?
Is it Buenos Aires?
No, Buenos Aires is in Argentina. And I was going to say that initially, but I know that's not true because I went there.
You were there.
Sao Paulo.
Right. Sao Paulo. So Rio, Sao Paulo. So I want to say it was Rio. It was in a Rio prison. And the video got banned because of the message, because of him putting this music and energy out about, like, they literally don't care about us. We're just pawns into this game of life. And I feel like that song offers it offers a balance in Michael Jackson that isn't represented as much, because the video that was showed was like some nice, whimsical, colorful video that like it didn't have the true essence of the original of the song, for one, and the original video of him in prison. So yeah, honorable mention though, and I say this, it's a funny honorable mention, but it still resonates. It's Earth Song by Michael Jackson, and only because it's like, fuck climate change and fuck people who aren't taking care of the planet and animals, poachers, and all that, all the common acts that are just destroying the rainforest. And we haven't talked about the hole in the ozone layer for years. So yeah, that's all I got.
Nice list, solid stuff.
All right, so we have none that overlap actually here, Cliff.
I like that.
Me too.
I had one that overlapped.
Second, if that's all right.
I'm interested in your list because of the music you listen to, John. I feel like I might know some of Vanessa's song. I feel like Vanessa is, I guess being from New York, Vanessa has like a nice mix of music and culture. She lives in LA. And I feel like you listen to a lot of folksy and bluesy songs. So I'm interested in knowing if any of those show up, and I want to hear them too.
They sure do.
He's excited. I love it.
So I'm a fan of music. I love protest music. I love songs that just kind of like wrap their fists around my heart and like make me feel and make me want to do things. And I like protest music a lot because it makes me want to just like fight people and burn shit down. So these aren't in any real particular order, except for number one, and I'll get to number one in a minute. Starting number 5, then, Fight the Power by Public Enemy. It's so self-explanatory. Title and chorus say it all. Fight the powers that be. The song talks a lot about oppression that Black people face in America and the lack of representation. One of the verses there, I was looking over the lyrics recently, and it just stuck out to me. I haven't heard the song in a while, and just reading, I was like, oh, shit. Yeah. As a white guy, that's not something I see personally, because it's frankly not something that affects me. But it is something I see talked about a lot, and to see it in a song written 30 years ago, it just kind of reinforces that idea that me personally, I have a lot to learn here, and that this has been a problem, and it's still a problem. With a verse, I'm not going to rap it, but it reads, most of my heroes don't appear on no stamps. Sample, look back, you looking fine. Nothing but rednecks for 400 years if you check. It's like, yeah, fuck, you're right.
You could have rapped that.
Number 4, or the next one, Killing in the Name by Rage Against the Machine. It's so electrically anti-government and anti-police. It's so brutal and so simple. It's so angry. I just love it. It's written in the wake of the Rodney King beatings, I believe. And Zach De La Rocha is the lead singer and writer there. The song's really about that and white supremacy as found in the police force. One of the refrains is, those who died are justified for wearing the badge to the chosen whites. In that, he kind of takes the view of the killer cop here, and in the killer cop's mind, those deaths are justified because he has a badge and he's one of the good whites. Like any great song, time has not dulled the impact of that. And the outro of Killing in the Name is just incredible. For much of the song, every time the chorus is, now you do what they told you. Now you do what they told you. Said, getting louder and louder and louder. The end of it is, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Just going louder and louder and louder. And the end, he just starts screaming it. And it's like, yeah, man, this is what's up. Like, yes, standing up to all this injustice, standing up to everything that's bad. Fuck you, I will not do what you tell me. Love that song. Next, A Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival. It is the definitive song that plays out of a Huey in every Vietnam movie ever made. And for good reason. 1, it's catchy as shit. 2, John Fogerty lays down some wonderful guitaring there. And 3, it absolutely correctly paints war as a rich man's game that has no problem with killing the poor. The rich get to skip the deaths because they can, all the while they shout at you, the poor, to give more for the country. The famous chorus, it ain't me, I ain't no senator's son. It ain't me, I ain't no fortunate one, no. And from time immemorial, that's war. The rich, the wealthy, they get to stand back and profit off of it while the poor go and die. That song was written during the Vietnam era, and it is as true today as it was then, as it was 1,000 years ago. It's utterly timeless. Next is another Vietnam era song, Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. It was written after the Kent State shootings in 1970, where Ohio National Guard shot and killed 4 students who were protesting the Vietnam War. Every great protest song is able to get people angry, and Neil Young, who wrote this, really does it here for me. The chorus of it is almost like a chant. Just, tin soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. 4 dead in Ohio. And that just paints such a great picture of what is happening and just how much the government has abandoned these people to the point where they're going and killing them. These are peaceful students protesting the Vietnam War, and they're shot dead. Whenever I hear this song, it's like, yeah, I'm ready to fight someone now. So thank you, Neil Young, for that. And number 1, this is probably one of my favorite songs of all time, regardless of genre, is Come Out Ye Black and Tans. It's an old Irish song. It popularized by the Wolf Tones, who did a version of it in the 70s. It is just a perfect song. I appreciate when people are just willing to talk a whole bunch of shit, and that's what this song does. It was written by IRA sympathizers, and it makes a point to call British soldiers cowards at every possible point, and I love that so much. The speaker in the song is an Irish guy who's come home drunk from a bar and is just yelling at the British soldiers in the street in his neighborhood, and it's just brilliant. Chorus goes, come out you black and tans. The British soldiers wore black and tan uniforms. Come out you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Kilishandra. And it goes on to talk more shit. My favorite verse is, come tell us how you slew them old Arabs 2 by 2. Like the Zulus, they had spears, bows, and arrows. How brave you faced one with your 16-pounder gun, and you frightened them natives to their marrow. So again, it's real tongue-in-cheek, and it's just saying, you're a fucking coward. Yeah, you won these wars, great, but you had a big-ass gun while you're fighting people with spears. What do you think's going to happen? And that's the whole song. It's incredible. I love it dearly. And
I'm gonna have to check out that song. I've never heard it before.
One honorable mention. It's a song called White People for Peace by Against Me. It's almost like anti-protest music in that it just calls protesting pointless, and I find that kind of funny. The chorus is, protest songs in response to military aggression, protest songs to try and stop the soldier's gun, protest songs in response to military aggression, protest songs to try and stop the soldier's gun. So it's basically, like, Against Me started as an anarcho-punk band. So a lot of what the song is saying, like, yeah, your protests are nice, but they're not doing anything. Your protest songs aren't stopping the military from killing these people. I find that point of view fascinating. Another very catchy song by a very interesting band.
Did you say anarcho punk rock?
Yes.
Is that like this punk rock for anarchy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, if you want to get real specific, it's folk anarcho punk rock. But
it had to be folk for you, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, all right, if you've never heard Against Me, I wouldn't call them folk. They have a lot of folk influence, but you won't hear it like that. It's very punky.
Cool. I mean, I like punk. I like that era. I like punk rock, so it might appeal to me.
They have better songs than that one, but for this specific purpose, like, yeah, the song's kind of funny. And I like how it's just like, yeah, your protesting's not doing anything.
Sad reality sometimes, right?
Uh-huh.
All right, Vanessa, you're closing us out. I hope your number 1 is like a game changer.
So I don't think I have any game changers. I was really sad to hear 2 overlaps, one from each of you, but I will deal with it.
Okay.
It's okay. It's all right. It's all in good fun. Number 5 was also Get Up, Stand Up by the Wailers, which I thought of you, Cliff, because I read that Bob Marley actually wrote that song after touring Haiti and seeing the poverty there, and that he wrote it for them to try to advocate and protest for themselves, which I thought was really cool.
That's dope. I never knew that.
Yeah. And I didn't think of your strategy, which is to like start mellow and then work your way up. But it works. I like that strategy. That's a good one. And so my number 4 is a song called Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore by John Prine. And this was a 1971 song, which was basically commentary on how, I think it's so relevant right now, how devotion to the flag is not going to serve you if you're ignoring the war that is being committed in its name and the death that is coming from that. There's a really cool phrase of the song. He says, but your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. They're already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Now Jesus don't like killing no matter what the reasons for, and your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. And there are so many people that I feel need to hear that song today in 2020. So I put that on my list.
Rest in peace, John Prine.
Totally.
I love that man greatly.
Yeah. He made
one of the huge casualties of this pandemic. Completely.
And made a really huge contribution to music and art and humanity. So yes, rest in peace, John Prine. My number 3 is We the People by A Tribe Called Quest, which came out on their 2016 album. And the song really is about the commonalities that we all share interspersed with narratives from the Trump campaign in 2016 and all of the hateful divisiveness of the narrative of what he was about then and continues to be about now. And I think that album from Tribe was really like necessary at that point. I think the name of the album is like We Got It From Here. Thank you for your service, which I thought was so brilliant for them to come back and say, like, listen, we've done this before. We'll do it again. We will write the protest songs. We will write the protest album, and we will come up at a time when Trumpito is trying to take over the world, and we will be the counter narrative to that. And I think that they were brilliant and masterful for doing that. And I have a lot of appreciation for the timing of that album. Number 2 for me is a song called Masters of War by Bob Dylan. And this is, I feel like to me, kind of like your run-of-the-mill 1960s, like anti-nuclear arms build-up, kind of protest song. But what I really love about it is in typical Bob Dylan style, it's really like in that dry kind of nagging way, asking you to look at yourself. And the fact that he's saying like, you masters of war, like the song is written to these people who have the power and only ever try to use it to harm people. And he's sort of saying like, we see you, we see through you, we see everything that you're trying to do. And we are going to be more powerful than you in the end. Like you have the power now, but we will have the power in the end because you are just this. The only thing that you are masterful of is war. And we are masterful of everything else. And I just really love that. Plus, I feel like I can't have a protest song list without Bob Dylan on there. So there's that. And then my number 1 is Fight the Power by Public Enemy, because I think it's like, I guess, and I didn't realize that I was doing it, but that feels to me like a build up to an anthem that, yes, is of course about racial injustice. And I can't even really add to what you spoke on about it, John, because I think you really painted a good picture of it. But it really just is like, even the phrase fight the power is like, that is what we have to be doing, certainly right now, but I think all the time, because we the people are the most important collective in this country, not the people who hold the power, especially if they're abusing that power. And we have every right to fight that however we need to do that. Well, maybe not however we need to do that. It depends on your political stance, but we get to fight the power. And I think that that's an anthem that we need to keep rocking out to, keep our energy high and keep moving forward. So that's my list, 2 from each of you, but I still think it's a pretty solid collection. And putting together a Spotify playlist, which by the time this is out, so everybody listening to this, you could head over to our Instagram, and in the link in our profile, you'll be able to get to the Spotify playlist with all of our top 5s and all of our honorable mentions. So if you're feeling the need to get ramped up for a protest that you're going to, or you're really trying to get into the spirit of anti-establishment and fighting the power, we've got the soundtrack for you.
I like that we didn't have that many overlaps. For some reason, I was expecting one of you, mostly you, Vanessa, to choose NWA Fuck the Police. Just because I feel like I said, I feel like you put off that energy, and I feel like you're an appreciator of hip hop. And what I was going to note earlier was that I've never, ever listened to the full song of Fuck the Police before. I've only heard it on like movies and TV. I've never sat down and listened to the whole song ever.
Want to know something funny? When I was in 7th and 8th grade, early 90s hip-hop was literally all I listened to. So I was like a 13-year-old white kid in a very rural school blasting that song everywhere I went.
So this is kind of my my thought process, kind of how I feel about it. I love Cali rap. West Coast rap is my favorite genre and subdivision of rap because of the stories, because of the unfortunately the culture. Like I love the stories surrounding that culture. But I think Fuck the Police is it's too poppy for me. It's too pop. I get it. I like it, but it's not as raw and rugged as what I grew up listening to when it came to West Coast hip hop. So when Fuck the Police was introduced to me, I was like, it's okay. And also, I've always been against music that's popular, the music that's on TV, music that's always in the movies, music that everyone talks about. Once it becomes kind of common, I'm like, yeah, I'm not that interested. I'm a hater.
Yeah, I get it. Going back to my the Philly punk phase I went through, one of my favorite things was like finding bands that only had like 200 plays on Spotify. I was like, oh yeah, they're great. I get it.
I like that perspective a lot.
You know what was fun though?
It feels more intimate, right?
Yeah, absolutely, dude. You go to concerts and there's like, I literally went to a concert once. I was in a conference room at the University of Delaware. It was me and like 50 other people, maybe, and had a blast. The only concert I've ever been to where 100% of the crowd was involved in a mosh pit. It's fantastic.
That's dope. I like the sound of that a lot. I've only been to one rock concert in my life. A good friend of mine, he loves rock music. He grew up on it. And it's this band called Chevelle. And I became a fan, like going to the concert, seeing their energy and listening to their music. I was like, I can get into this. I mean, I like punk rock. I like all that 90s and early 2000s rock also.
Chevelle is great live.
All right, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Follow along by subscribing to the podcast for updates on new episodes. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at White Gray Black Pod. That's YT Gray GREY Black BLK Pod. You can follow me on Twitter at King of Rums. You can follow Cliff at
Gult's Conditioning on Instagram and Clifford Janice on Twitter.
And you can also follow Vanessa. However, she was swallowed by her microphone. You can follow her. You can follow her on Instagram at The Hungry Feminine.
And Twitter at The Hungry Femme. I think that's right.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you all next time. Peace.
Peace.